Ever wondered how a determined kid from war-torn Czechoslovakia forged a path to NHL glory? Meet Stan Mikita, an offensive genius who transformed from feisty underdog to one of hockey's most respected figures. In this video, we'll journey through his extraordinary evolution, from practicing on frozen ponds in Ontario to pioneering new stick technology on hockey's biggest stage. If you're a fan of underdog victories, record-shattering plays, and the spirit of reinvention, Stan Mikita's story will keep you on the edge of your seat. Stan Mikita was born on May 20th, 1940, in what was then Czechoslovakia under the name Stanislav Gavoth. As a small child, he found himself at the center of a family decision that would alter not only his own destiny, but also the course of hockey history. His parents entrusted him to an aunt and uncle who had emigrated to Canada. They had settled in St. Catharines, Ontario, a city already steeped in the rhythms and passions of the Canadian winter. With that move, Mikita's life would follow a winding road that started in a war-torn region of Europe and eventually led him to the pinnacle of professional hockey. Even in his earliest years in Ontario, he displayed an innate curiosity and determination that hinted at what was to come. He picked up the game quickly on local frozen ponds, sometimes skating until dark despite sub-zero temperatures, and crafted a style that balanced raw skill with an undercurrent of fierce competitiveness. Hockey was, for him, not merely a pastime, but a way of forging an identity in a new country. During his childhood in St. Catharines, he learned to speak English and adapt to Canadian culture, a transition made all the more urgent by the bustling world of youth sports. He didn't just learn the language, he absorbed every nuance of the hockey community, from its passionate fan base to its reverence for a kind of unspoken code that demanded a player stand up for himself on the ice. Local coaches, impressed by his ability to stick handle around older kids, singled him out as a talent worth developing. Yet, even then, he had what some described as an edge, a willingness to lay a hit or respond in kind if an opponent played dirty. That trait stood out in an era that prized physical play. Still, few could have predicted just how integral it would become in the narrative of his professional career. By his teenage years, he had joined the St. Catharines TPs of the Ontario Hockey Association, one of the top junior leagues in Canada. There, faced with bigger, older, more battle-tested competition, Mikita sharpened both his scoring abilities and his toughness. He learned how to absorb body checks from defenders who outweighed him by 20 or 30 pounds, how to leverage his low center of gravity to maintain puck control in corners, and how to unleash precise shots at a goaltender with little margin for error. Coaches were struck by the duality of his play. On one hand, he had a silky smooth puck-handling style reminiscent of European players. On the other hand, he could explode into a scuffle or retaliate with a slash if he felt provoked. That blend of finesse and fire drew the attention of several NHL scouts. The Chicago Blackhawks, a franchise in desperate need of fresh talent, took particular notice, impressed by how Mikita seemed to marry skill and grit in a single package. In 1959, the Blackhawks officially brought him into the organization. He had a brief stint in the minor leagues before landing on Chicago's NHL roster for the 1959-60 season. Stepping onto NHL ice as a 19-year-old would intimidate most teenagers, but Mikita approached the challenge with the confidence of someone who had been waiting his entire life for this opportunity. Teammates soon discovered that Mikita carried himself with an intense self-belief, talking incessantly about how he could beat bigger defenders with pure footwork and how he refused to be bullied. Although he was still adjusting to the sheer speed of the professional game, he showed flashes of brilliance in stick handling and forechecking. At times, his competitive drive boiled over, resulting in altercations and penalty minutes that would become a hallmark of his early career. The Chicago Blackhawks of the late 1950s were in the midst of an identity crisis. The franchise, part of the NHL's original six, had struggled for consistency, overshadowed by the dynastic Montreal Canadiens and overshadowed locally by baseball's Cubs and White Sox. The fans yearned for a roster that could bring a Stanley Cup back to Chicago, a city starved for hockey success. In Mikita, along with budding stars like Bobby Hull and goaltender Glenn Hall, the front office believed they had the nucleus of a contender. Mikita's rookie output was modest, but there were glimpses, a clutch goal here, a perfectly timed pass there, suggesting he might develop into the cornerstone center they desperately needed. His coming-out party occurred in the 1960-61 season. While Bobby Hull dazzled crowds with blazing speed and unstoppable slap shots, Mikita became the playmaking pivot, controlling the tempo of each shift, threading passes through infinitesimal seams, and setting up Hull and other wingers for point-blank scoring opportunities. Yet Mikita's game wasn't limited to serving as a setup man. He fired his own well-placed wrist shots that often caught goaltenders off guard, a testament to countless hours practicing alone on the ice. But it was his competitive streak, one part determination, one part aggression, that truly made him stand out. If an opposing center tried to rough him up in the face-off circle, Mikita had no qualms about delivering a quick slash to the ankles or a shove in the slot. The fans in Chicago quickly learned to love that bristling presence, praising him as a pit bull who refused to be intimidated. That season culminated in the Blackhawks making a spirited run through the playoffs, culminating in a Stanley Cup Finals showdown against the Detroit Red Wings. The series was a study in contrasts. Detroit, led by Gordie Howe and a cast of veterans, epitomized old guard toughness. Chicago represented a hungry youth movement. Mikita, just 20 years old, went toe-to-toe with some of the league's most formidable names. In critical moments, he capitalized on loose pucks around the crease, demonstrated surgical precision on face-offs, and generally played beyond his years. When Chicago finally secured the cup, the city erupted in celebrations not seen in decades. The jubilant team hoisted the trophy, and Mikita, though still early in his career, glowed in the knowledge that he was already a champion. That moment etched him into the city's sports consciousness, establishing him not just as a promising player, but a genuine star. Yet, as he basked in the afterglow of triumph, the darker side of his on-ice temperament persisted. Over the next few seasons, Mikita racked up impressive point totals, evolving into one of the league's premier centers. He secured multiple appearances on the All-Star teams, competed for the Art Ross Trophy, and formed an almost telepathic link with Bobby Hull. Nonetheless, he also topped the league in penalty minutes, frequently getting into scraps or incurring minor penalties that crippled the Hawks' momentum at inopportune times. Coaches alternated between praising his combativeness and lamenting how easily opponents could bait him into a fight. The fans, similarly, were torn. Some adored his flair for the dramatic, including the willingness to play an enforcer's role if needed. Others wondered if his penalty proclivity was costing Chicago points in close games. His personal crossroads arrived in the mid-1960s. Legend has it that a casual remark from his daughter, asking why he spent so much time sitting down in the penalty box, prompted Mikita to reevaluate his approach. While the exact details of that conversation might have shifted in retellings, there's no doubt that Mikita consciously decided to turn over a new leaf. From one season to the next, his penalty minutes dropped precipitously, and his focus pivoted to mastering the game's subtleties, face-off techniques, positioning, and using his stick handling to defuse opponents instead of confronting them physically. This transformation was unprecedented in the NHL. Most players typecast as bad boys either fully embraced that reputation or saw their performance diminish as they tried to become less aggressive. Mikita, by contrast, improved. Freed from the burden of constant penalty calls, he scored more, assisted more, and controlled the flow of play more effectively. By the mid to late 1960s, Stan Mikita ranked among the NHL's top scorers and was widely regarded as one of its shrewdest, most creative centers. He captured the Art Ross Trophy for leading the league in points on 4 occasions: 1964, 1965, 1967, and 1968. A remarkable feat. What's more, in 1967 and 1968, he also claimed the Hart Trophy as league MVP. And to top it off, he received the Lady Byng Memorial Trophy for gentlemanly conduct twice, 1967 and 1968. The fact that he could win the Gentlemanly Award after leading the league in penalty minutes just a few years earlier astonished fans and media alike. In the dressing room, his teammates teased him about the stark shift, but they also respected him more than ever. Indeed, he had found a way to channel his fierce drive into a skill-centric approach that yielded more victories and fewer unnecessary scraps. One of the most iconic contributions Mikita made to hockey culture was his role in popularizing the curved stick blade. Accounts vary as to how exactly he discovered the advantage. Some say a cracked blade bent inadvertently, and he noticed the increased spin and unpredictability it gave his shots. Regardless of the precise moment, Mikita saw that a slight curve could turn a straightforward wrist shot into something goalies dreaded. He refined the design, sometimes to an extreme curve that gave him an almost unfair edge. Defenders hated it. Goaltenders cursed it. But soon enough, Bobby Hull followed suit, and the rest of the league was forced to adapt. The NHL eventually imposed limits on blade curvature, but by then, the genie was out of the bottle. Players recognized the power of altering equipment to gain that extra edge. In the broader hockey landscape, this era also saw the NHL expand from the original 6 to 12 teams in 1967, and then further expansions. Suddenly, the league was welcoming new franchises in places like Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, and Minnesota. This expansion opened spots for more players, diversified playing styles, and ushered in a wave of new talent. Mikita, then in his late 20s and early 30s, embraced the influx of fresh competition. He remained a top performer, leading the Blackhawks to multiple playoff appearances throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s. Though they ran into formidable adversaries in postseason battles, particularly the Montreal Canadiens Super Squad, Mikita maintained his star status, regularly overshadowing younger players who might have been physically faster but lacked his refined instincts. The Chicago Stadium became the stage for many of his legendary battles. Fans packed its seats night after night, chanting his name, thrilled by his displays of speed, cunning, and, when necessary, well-timed aggression. He was never a saint on the ice, but his approach was now controlled, harnessed to benefit the team. When an opponent took a cheap shot at a teammate, Mikita might still step in to send a message, but typically in a manner that minimized risk. The evolution felt complete. He had matured from a hot-headed scrapper to a strategic master who could read the flow of a game 2 or 3 passes ahead. He also took younger Blackhawks under his wing, offering pointers on how to win face-offs, shield the puck near the boards, and maintain composure when confronted with physical play. Throughout the early 1970s, Mikita compiled impressive stats, continuing to reach 80, 90, and even 100 points in seasons that tested the stamina of every player in an ever-growing league. Chicago fans recognized that with every passing year, they were witnessing the final chapters of a storied career. He accumulated career milestones, 500 goals, 1,000 points, 1,200 points, and soared up the all-time leaderboards. Though the Blackhawks returned to the Stanley Cup Finals in 1971 and 1973, they lost heartbreakers to the Montreal Canadiens. Still, Mikita's role in keeping Chicago competitive against powerhouse opponents further cemented his legacy as a franchise icon. As he moved into his mid-30s, minor injuries and the relentless pace of the NHL began to take their toll. He experienced back issues, foot problems, and lingering soreness in his wrists, none of which halted him entirely, but each of which sapped a little bit of his explosiveness. By the mid to late 1970s, he had morphed into a veteran presence, a second-line center or power play specialist who could spark critical plays but no longer carried the entire offense on his shoulders. The new generation of stars, names like Guy Lafleur, Marcel Dion, and Phil Esposito, were rewriting scoring records. Yet Mikita remained relevant, sometimes acting as a mentor, often surprising fans with a surge of brilliance that recalled his prime. He played his final NHL game in the 1979-80 season, choosing to retire after an extraordinary 22-year career, all spent with the Chicago Blackhawks. He left the ice to a thunderous standing ovation, the Chicago faithful acknowledging not just the trophies and the goals, but the entire narrative arc of a player who had grown up before their eyes. Over his career, he amassed 1,467 points in 1,394 games, including 541 goals, a remarkable feat for someone who, in the early years, was as likely to be in the penalty box as on the score sheet. There was talk that he might coach or work in the front office, but he opted for a more ambassadorial role, periodically appearing at Blackhawks events, greeting fans and advocating for the sport he loved. In 1983, the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto enshrined Stan Mikita on his first ballot of eligibility, a recognition that sealed his status among the sport's immortals. Sharing space with luminaries like Gordie Howe and Jean Béliveau, Mikita took his place as one of the best to ever play the game. Although the Blackhawks struggled mightily in the 1980s, never finding a consistent formula for Cup success, the organization continued to honor Mikita's legacy. His number 21 jersey, along with Bobby Hull's number 9, became sacred symbols of Chicago hockey, visible reminders of a golden period when the team's identity was shaped by two unstoppable offensive juggernauts. Off the ice, Mikita also explored business ventures, including a donut shop chain in the Chicago area that briefly captured local attention. He made philanthropic contributions, particularly focusing on the hearing impaired, having recognized the challenges faced by fans who couldn't fully experience the roar of the crowd. This charitable work reflected how much he had internalized the idea of service, as though his transformation from on-ice antagonist to community-minded role model stretched beyond hockey, permeating every aspect of his post-playing life. Media interviews from this period portrayed him as gracious, reflective, and eager to pass on lessons about self-restraint and the power of reinvention. When Mikita's health began to decline in later years, he faced serious battles with illnesses including dementia. Fans, journalists, and former teammates rallied around him with well wishes and tributes. It became clear that the narrative of Stan Mikita was as much about perseverance off the ice as on it. The city and the hockey community recognized that behind the stats and trophies was a man who had navigated personal struggles, cultural shifts, and the physical toll of a brutally demanding sport, always emerging with grace. The outpouring of respect, particularly in Chicago, was enormous. It underscored how deeply woven he had become into the civic tapestry. Even those who had never seen him play live felt reverence for his name, as if it epitomized the best qualities of an athlete: passion, adaptability, and generosity of spirit. He died on August 7, 2018, at the age of 78, leaving behind an immeasurable void in the hockey world. The tributes poured in from around the globe. Longtime Blackhawks broadcaster Pat Foley called him the true embodiment of Chicago hockey, while Bobby Hull described him as the smartest player I ever saw. Sports outlets published retrospectives on his dazzling artistry, from the curved stick innovation to his lethal face-off prowess. The United Center, home to the Blackhawks, became a de facto shrine, with fans leaving messages of gratitude and recollections of how Mikita had made them fall in love with hockey in the first place. That is, Stan Mikita's hockey career in all its complexity. A tapestry woven of breakneck sprints down the ice, heated rivalries with original six foes, heartbreak and multiple cup near misses, quiet joy and personal accolades, and above all, a transformation that defied the league's preconceived notions of who he should be. He ended up representing not just an era of the NHL, but the essence of how sports can push individuals to evolve beyond the boundaries they initially set for themselves. And that is why, decades after he last laced up his skates, Stan Mikita endures as one of the most respected, beloved figures to have ever graced the world of professional hockey.